Hello, welcome to Sheffield and the Tinsley Viaduct, the first steel-made two-tiered road bridge in the country. It opened in 1968 and it carries both the M1 motorway and A361 over the Don Valley, Sheffield Canal and Midland Mainline Railway. It's a major landmark on our motorway network, perhaps remembered by most for running alongside and a mere 12 metres from a pair of impressive cooling towers, the last surviving remains of Blackburn Meadows coal-fired power station, which closed in 1980, with the towers being demolished in 2008. The Tinsley Viaduct is a 1,033 metre long steel box girder bridge or viaduct that, despite being built by the lowest bidder to a fairly crap plan in possibly the worst location for such a structure, has managed to survive for over 55 years, and I've no idea how. If you were to look at building such a structure today, you probably wouldn't bother. Let's start at the start, and during the 1960s, the Ministry of Transport were looking to extend the recently opened M1 motorway through Sheffield and on to Leeds. Overall, a fairly straightforward plan, except for one bit, the Don Valley in Sheffield. Back then, the area was awash with various industries. There was, of course, the coal-fired power station, which had a total of 7 cooling towers. There was a sewer works, and being Sheffield, several massive steelworks with the associated railway connections. There's the Sheffield Canal and River Don to worry about as well. But wait, there's more. Historically, the land in this area had been extensively mined, meaning there was a high possibility of subsidence. You'd think it couldn't be much worse, but it can. The power station emitted high amounts of sulfur dioxide, something like 29 tonnes a day, and it also created insane levels of humidity, what with its 7 cooling towers working through 10.5 million gallons of water every hour. In addition, there was a sulfuric acid plant nearby, belching out all kinds of you environment, and together this created what was widely regarded as the most corrosive environment in the country, perfect for motorway structures. But we must remember, it was the 1960s and a different time. These were just things that existed. They certainly weren't going to get in the way of the motorway or viaduct's construction. Initially, the Ministry of Transport were looking to build a pre-stressed concrete structure with the odd bit of structural steel. In theory, this was the best option to fight against corrosion. But they didn't do that in the end, opting for a predominantly steel structure. It's not clear as to why they changed their mind, but with Sheffield being the home of steel and there being a steelworks right next to the build site, perhaps they wanted the most convenient option. Or they were bribed. Construction began in 1965 using 12,500 tonnes of steel to make 17 pairs of steel columns that support longitudinal box girders on which cross girders are placed 3 metres apart. And because the upper deck is longer than the lower, 4 additional support structures were constructed for the upper deck. All of the steel used had a particularly high anti-corrosion specification in the hope to extend the design life of the viaduct for as long as possible against the toxic factory atmosphere. You may notice the viaduct shape is not a perfect straight line. It has a sort of wave shape, and this is because it had to be carefully threaded through the existing industry and infrastructure, and indeed the surrounding industry made its construction a pain in the arse because access was very limited. As a result, most of the larger steel viaduct components were manufactured off-site and brought in by rail. This solved both the access problem and the technical nature of building a bridge that isn't straight. The parts could be manufactured to higher tolerances off-site before being simply bolted together to make the final item. Interestingly, they utilised a narrow gauge railway to move the larger pre-built sections of the viaduct into position, some weighing 25 tonnes apiece. The locomotive in this photo is moving a girder section along the bridge. Taken in 1966, you'd expect the locomotive to be long gone, but no, the very same engine lives on to this day at the Irchester Narrow Gauge Railway Museum. Fun fact, after being used on the Tinsley Viaduct project, the locomotive became the workhorse for the experimental hover train, a crazy idea that might have seen hover trains running at over 250 miles an hour, but it didn't. It was all complete by 1968 with 6 lanes of motorway and 2 hard shoulders on the top deck and 4 lanes or a dual carriageway, pedestrian path and service road on the lower deck, and it was lovely. But in 1970 a bridge collapsed in Australia and Wales, and then another in 1971 in Germany. These bridges were all designed by the same organisation. Coincidence they were collapsing? I think not. The thing is, the same organisation played a large role in the design of the Tinsley Viaduct, and the local council were shitting themselves. Committees were formed, and the short version is that the designs were found to be and during the 1970s, whilst there was no risk of collapse to the Tinsley Viaduct, it underwent a strengthening programme just in case. Interestingly, these diagonal supports that you can see today are the result of that strengthening programme. In the 1990s, the viaduct had to be strengthened further because of EU legislation that would see the introduction of 40-tonne lorries on UK roads. Fair enough, it was never built with such vehicles in mind, but then more work would ensue in 2002 at a cost of £82 million, or about £148 million in today's money, which is more than the viaduct cost in the first place. But hold on a minute, you're telling me that the country's first dual-tier road viaduct, built in the 1960s in a highly corrosive and toxic environment out of materials that everyone thought would fail across land that was likely to collapse amongst buildings and over rivers and railways, is still standing today carrying the M1 motorway just like it always did? Yeah, pretty much. Sure, it's had the odd bit of welding here and there, some of it rather expensive, I must admit, but what classic car hasn't had a bit of work done? And yes, the design may not have initially been up to scratch, but the material choice, Sheffield steel, maybe this was the right choice after all, and the reason why this amazing structure is still standing after 55 years against all of the odds. Thanks for watching.
Continue